Hi everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our review of job accounting and access control for our new line of products, Polaris. My name is Gabe Gagliardo. I'm the senior technical trainer here at Samsung, and I work with all of our printer products as well as some of our laptops. And I'll be taking you on this little tour of setting this up and working with it. So first, let's kind of get started. We're gonna take a look at some of the quick points of note. Key models, things like that. We're going to take a look at actually setting it up, managing users through the web service itself. So we'll have that up on your screens as we go through. All right, so let's pop over to that PowerPoint view for a second and we'll go through that. So again, we're going to start by looking at our general agenda. So again, it's job accounting and access control setup for the Polaris units. User management, of course. Okay, so we want to make sure that we can we have an understanding on how to manage these users, their codes, their limitations as far as job accounting and so forth. Of course, the relevant models are key to know. So you have all of our Polaris units, which are CLX 9201, 9251, 9301, as well as the monochrome counterparts SCX 8123 and SCX 8128. Now, as far as the color and the monochrome machines go, they are a little different with the way they're set up. However, as we review the color, which is what's going to be our sample unit here, the review of the color will still prepare you for that monochrome. So even though there are some slight changes to how the monochrome is laid out in the web service, it's still the same basic principle. So you're going to see a lot of the same terminology, a lot of the same things you can limit. There will just be less of it because those monochrome machines are not XOA and don't have quite as much functionality as those color machines. Okay? So let's get back to that PowerPoint a second and we'll go through. So when we're going to set this up, we have to first ask ourselves a few questions. First off, why are we logging in? Do I have to do accounting or access control, right? What's my focus? Why are we here? Then, when do you want to be prompted to log in? All right, so that refers to our basic device and application authentication. We'll look at that in more detail once we actually log into the web service and take a look at those settings and what everything means. How do you log in? Is it ID and password? Is it ID only? Okay, we'll also look at your logout times and things like that. What happens if you put the wrong password in more than once and those sorts of things. So we'll review all of that as well as we go through. But again, it's key to remember, we want to make sure we understand what the parameters are of this setup and installation for whichever customer you may have. All right, what do you want to block or track? Of course, what do we want to block copying or limit a certain amount of copying, as well as who is logging in, the user management aspect of it. Now again, before we really dive in, I want to make sure that there's a couple of things that we keep in the back of our head. Job accounting and access control are set up independently. So for starters, if you're familiar with our Cosmos series of machines, 9350s, 9250s, SCX 8030s, SCX 8040s, excuse me, those have an access control and job accounting setup as well. However, everything in that case is managed with one list. Here we have two separate lists, so we really need to remember, do I want to set up access control or do I want to set up job accounting? You have to kind of draw that line in the sand before we go through this setup procedure. And again, keeping that distinction in place will definitely make your life a lot easier as we go through our configuration with everything else. Again, we have easy user management in Microsoft Excel. So we can easily export our users to a template, let's say an Excel template, and now we can simply copy and paste our users and whatnot into the spreadsheet. So what we're going to look at first as far as user management is the manual input of this user data, and then that'll be quote unquote the hard way of doing it. And then we'll look at the easy way, because if we look at the hard way first, the easy way will be that much easier. All right, so, but we will definitely take a look at that and get an understanding of what we can do with the export option. All right. Job accounting users can be linked to access control users. So even though the lists are managed separately, we still have the capability to merge the two worlds together and use both job accounting and access control at the same time. Now, in most cases, it will be one or the other. However, you may have a customer at some point in time that will request this. So we'll definitely take a look at that. It's actually a fairly easy process as well, especially including that, when you're using that export option that we mentioned a moment ago. And what's great about this new Polaris is that we've added pop-up capability in the driver. So if we rewind a few months before Polaris came out, and you had a customer, let's say a law office, that needed to track billing for clients, for prints and things like that. Well, previously, we would need to have a special driver to do this. Now, Polaris provides this as a standard option in the driver as it ships from the factory. So we'll take a look at how to configure that little option. It's very quick and easy to do, and it will give you the capability to have a prompt for a password at the time of a print, right? Rather than just having to put it into the driver and having it set forever. All right, so again, that's another nice little new enhancement that we've included with this new family of machines. So we'll start our review with access control setup. Again, access control versus job accounting, two separate items. So we have our authentication method, right, where the domain is going to be local. That'll make a little bit more sense in a few minutes once we actually start configuring everything and seeing what it looks like on the operations panel and how it ties into our user lists and our login methods and everything else, right? So again, this is just kind of one of those little snapshot points. And again, in a little bit, we will bring it kind of back to this point and it'll make a little more sense for you. Then we need to figure out what is wide open. Okay, so we need to decide, is copying going to be wide open for everybody, but I want to limit faxing? Or is faxing wide open, but I want to limit copying? So we can decide now if certain things are going to be wide open versus requiring a password. All right, so we'll take a look at that as well. And then we need to remember the flow. We have to set up our authority, our group, and our user. Okay, that flow is very important because let's say we create an authority, which is essentially a role. The authority will basically be a grouping of settings that this particular person may or may not use. Now, the authority has to point to a group, which has to point to a user, right? That's that chain, that's that back and forth. So I can't delete a user if it's associated, I'm sorry, check that. I can't delete a group unless if it's associated to a user. And I can't delete an authority if a group is associated with it. And again, nothing will work along that chain unless it's set and configured properly. All right? So we're going to be sure to take a look at that as well as I go through the demonstration within the web service itself. So let me pop into my web service. All right, get back to the computer view there. Thanks. And so we're just going to log in. So to enter the web service, if you're unfamiliar with our product or how to enter the web service, simply type in the IP address of the machine into the URL of your web browser and hit enter, and it will bring up our main page. And we will log in. So the admin login is going to be whatever you set it up when you first turn the machine on. So in my case, it's admin and admin123@. However, that will vary. That is not a default, okay? That gets set up when you first turn the machine on. Right? Important to remember that. Now, another nice piece of this is that, let's say we do have a customer that forgets their administrator password. Like that never happens. So now we can actually use this same job accounting and access control method to create a backup administrator. Right? So now let's say as a dealership, you can now go in and create this backdoor user, which can then, if you need to get into, let's say reset their administrator password, now you can go ahead and do so. You do want to be careful and ensure that we are adhering to your customer security protocols. So, if we know if it's like a government location, odds are this is a no-no. If we're talking about maybe some healthcare or even financial institutions, they might not allow this either. So again, we want to be careful about how we're using that feature as far as creating a backdoor administrator for your particular dealership. But the nice thing to know is that if we need to do it, we can. So now if they do forget their password, we can now log in as an administrator and go ahead and reset it and change it as needed. So we're going to go in and we're just going to log into the machine. I just went ahead and hit login, so let's give it a second. And we are in. So where our access control is going to be set up is under Security, User Access Control. Let me zoom in on this, give you guys a good view. There we are. Go a little bit more. Yeah, it looks a little bit better. So we'll go User Access Control. So now this is going to bring us to our main setup page. All right. So before I was talking about basic, device, and application. Again, let me zoom in on that temporarily just to give you a quick view, better look. Again, basic authentication, device, and application authentication. So let's talk a little bit about these authentication methods and what they mean. So basic authentication is going to refer to what is set to when you turn the machine on and it comes out of the box for the very first time. So you're only asked for a password for administrative functions, changing an IP address, so on and so forth. So a lot of what we're looking at with regard to these authentication methods also applies to the Cosmos machine, 9350s and 9250s. So this might be a little bit of a refresh for you. So there's your basic authentication. Then we have device authentication. Now, device authentication is going to refer to requiring a password no matter what. As soon as you walk up to the machine, the device is locked. You cannot do something as basic as change the volume. You can't change your power saver settings, nothing. You must log in order to do absolutely anything. Now, the third option we have is application authentication. Now, application authentication refers to logging in when we have to access a particular feature. So I can walk up to the machine and navigate to the home screen. I can even change the volume and basic things like that. However, the second I go to hit copy or fax or whatever I might limit, then I'm prompted for my password. All right. So for the purposes of this demonstration, I'm going to choose application authentication because that kind of gives us a little more to look at as we go through the material. And of course, we want to ensure that we are applying everything every time. Now, once we have our authentication method chosen, right, application in this case, next thing we want to talk about with regard to access control is choosing what is going to be wide open, regardless of anything else. Meaning, I don't need a password to access this feature. I can use this as much as I want, but then when I want to use something else, password. Excuse me. So that's going to be the next piece of this puzzle, and we can do this by going into Edit Application. So let me zoom out a second here. Actually, we got a pretty good view. So now if we look over here, we see application name, copy, fax, machine setup, so on and so forth. Now, what this is going to do, and you'll notice that everything is already set to enable. What this means is, with enable, means the password is enabled for this feature. So that tells us now that if this is enabled, I need a password to access copying or faxing or whatever else. However, if I highlight this and I choose disable, see now how it's set to disable. That now says I don't need a password for this feature. So in this case, for copying, I can use copying all I want, no matter what. I don't need a password, I don't need special privileges. I can walk up to the machine and make a copy. However, everything else will require a password in order to use it. Right. So that's kind of the rundown with that. So I'm just going to go back in here and I'm going to enable for copying because that's going to be a little more common. And I'm just going to go into scan to email and disable that. Right. So now in the case of this example, whenever I walk up to the machine, I'm going to need a password to copy, but not for scan to email. I'm sorry, I'm going to need a, scan to email will be wide open. And I'm just going to apply that. So now that we've chosen what's going to be wide open, and we've chosen our authentication method and all those things, now we can talk a little bit about the domain and some of those other things that I mentioned. Remember how I said the domain was local, and what does that exactly mean? So let's talk about that now. So if we look in the display here, you can see I have a box that says AA method. Again, this is below the edit application that we saw before. Now on this screen right here, this AA method is referring to where are my user codes coming from, right? What list, what server are these coming from? So in this case, you see local authentication, right? Remember before I mentioned that domain equals local? That's what this is referring to. So with local authentication, that means that all of my user codes and passwords are on the machine. They don't reside on a server or anything else. They're in the machine, they're stored in the machine, they're managed in the machine. If we look at some of these others now, you could see Kerberos, SMB, LDAP. So that refers to an external server that would store these user codes and whatnot. I'm not going to go into too much detail on that. That is another training altogether. But again, the most important thing to take away from this is that we do have the capability to use these servers for our purposes of access control. So that's a nice thing to know. However, for the scope of this class, given time constraints and whatnot, because once we start delving into other servers, it can significantly add to the time. So for the scope of this class and training, we're going to focus on the standalone local aspect of things. As we move along, we could see now we have standard accounting only. All right, well, more on that a little bit later. And then sync through a provider, which refers to our sync through web admin 6 software. All right, and that can be downloaded from Samsung.com. Again, that refers to an external server for management, and therefore it's something that we're not going to focus on today. So again, going back to the idea of local authentication. Local authentication refers to using this list over here. Right? Key to remember, this list means local authentication. Standard accounting list, as you might guess, refers to standard accounting only. We're going to look at that next, in the next portion of this training. All right, so for now, we're going to focus on the access control part of it, and then we'll look at job accounting later. So now that we have our authentication method chosen, we can now talk about when we're prompted, or how we're prompted to log in, right? So when we look at the how we're going to log in, you could see here, under that options, ID password login, ID only login. All right, so if you have, let's say, again, going back to that example of a law office, they might only want the ID only login option, so they can just type in a client name or a client code or something without having to enter 2 fields of data, right? So that would be the ID only login option. Excuse me. Now, we also have some other things we can do in this particular menu. So if we look at some of the other options, password expiration period. So now we can actually have that person's password changed or disabled, or expire after a certain amount of time. We can even change our password policy. So by default, the password for a regular user is going to be about 4 characters. Okay, so that's kind of a standard deal. However, you may have a more secure environment or more secure protocol in place, right? Again, talking about government, talking about banks, financials, healthcare, and so on. So now we can even have it enforce a strong password. So if we enable the strong password, which you see right down here, notice how it automatically jumps to 8. So that essentially means that this is going to be like an administrator password in its protocol and how it needs to be created, which means at least 8 characters, at least 1 letter, at least 1 number, and at least 1 special character. All right, so those are really the 4 key points about the administrator password. So that's the minimum. But if you notice, if you look closely, you'll see in there that you can actually go up to 32 characters as a minimum. Now, if you wanted to be sadistic to your users, you could do this and make it a minimum of 32 characters. However, where this really comes into play more often than not would be if you have like a card access solution. Okay, so again, talking about military, government type applications. You may have a really, really secure protocol in place, but the end user might not actually have to type in those 32 characters. So that 32 character password might just be associated with a card. All right, so that's really where that comes into play. As far as practical purposes, a 32 character password is almost counterproductive if you had to manually type it in. So, but again, that really comes into play for that card access type solution. So there's your password policy. I'm just going to set that back to the standard there. And again, as with any setting, we want to make sure we apply whenever we do anything. Then we have our login restriction. So the login restriction basically means that if somebody tries to log in within a certain amount of time, and they do it incorrectly a certain amount of times, they are locked out for a certain amount of times. So sometimes, let's say you try to access your banking website or your credit card or whatever it might be. I'm sure some of you may have typed in your password incorrectly once or twice, and sure enough, they say, hey, you got to call customer service because now you're locked out of the system. So that's essentially what this feature is for, right? This will basically prevent anybody from sitting at the machine and trying to log in multiple times, trying to figure out somebody's password, right? So putting this restriction in place now will prevent somebody from trying to just kind of randomly input passwords to get into the machine fraudulently, right? Or when they shouldn't be. And then we have our log out policy. Now, the log out policy refers to our, what's going to happen when we're done doing a job at the machine. So by default, the machine is set to no logout. So what logout does is, and again, it gives you a nice little description, it means that you are not going to be automatically kicked out. Now, by default, we also have an auto logout time in place. So when you have no logout, it still has this as a backup. So in this particular case, I have my machine set to 7,200 seconds, which basically means 2 hours. Now, I just have that in place just for the purposes of this training. You can set it down to as low as a minute and anywhere in between. Then you have force to log out. So force to log out is going to basically kick you out as soon as you're done with your job. You walk up to the machine, you log in, you do your copy job or your fax or whatever it might be, and then the second your job is completed, boom, you're kicked out instantly. There's no warning or anything else. You have a prompt saying that you're logged out and you're out. So now you can just simply walk away and not worry about somebody walking up behind you and using your user code to make copies and use your color prints for the day or whatever it might be. And the final option in there is our logout reminder. So what the logout reminder is going to do for you, see it right there, is when you walk up to the machine, you log in and you do your job, and then as soon as that last page of the job comes out or your fax is sent or the email is sent, you'll be prompted to log out. So again, it kind of gives you that two-way go. So now if you have to do another job, now you don't have to go back and automatically type in your password again, which can be a little bit of a hassle sometimes. So we have this flexibility as well. So again, it's another nice little wrinkle on it. So depending on what way your customer wants to use this feature, you now have a couple of different ways you can kind of mix and match and really kind of tune it to their particular needs. So now that we have all that in place, we have our logout policy and all those other things, we can close that, and now we can start talking about our authority. So in our authority management, this is where we're going to create a series of features that anybody associated to this authority will have. So if I hit add there, you can see now you have your admin settings, right? So by setting that to read and write, now this person is essentially an administrator. So anybody you assign to this role can get in there and change the IP address, as well as other administrative items. Then we can see some of the other things: copy and print, color versus mono, copying, locked versus unlocked, because again, the color option comes up here. Duplexing, manage address books, so on and so forth. So you see we have all of these things. So in the case of this machine, anything that this machine can do, you essentially have the capability of limiting, right? So now you can really, really fine tune it. Now we talked a little bit about the difference between the color and the monochrome. The monochrome does not have as many features to limit with its access control. However, it's still a very similar setup process. Again, the only real difference, or the biggest difference being, there's just fewer items to limit in the monochrome, right? And again, that's the monochrome non-XOA model. So I'm just going to give this guy a name. I'm going to call it test, just for the purposes of the training. Again, you have to give it a name, and I will hit apply. Again, before I apply that, I'm just going to choose a couple of things. So I'm going to say monochrome, or better yet, I'm going to say have color and monochrome. Let's see, copying, we'll unlock that. And actually, I changed my mind. I'm going to go ahead and make this monochrome only. See some of these other things, scan to email. Now, you might notice before, remember before, when in that edit application option, I went ahead and disabled authentication for scan to email. Now, that is going to trump whatever I do right now. So I can make scan to email locked in this particular view of the authority, but it doesn't matter because earlier under that edit application, we made scan to email wide open. So no matter what I do in here, that edit application setting, right, that authentication enabled or disabled trumps what I do here. All right, so that's kind of the main thing. So there might be an occasion where, and this has come up in some of my classes, where somebody would disable app authentication for something, but then lock a feature, and then they wonder why they can still access the feature, when it turns out they disabled the password requirement for it. So we want to keep that in mind as well, and be careful about how we change our settings, and really understand what they are and what they do as far as the settings and how they're configured. So I'll just leave that locked for purposes of the demonstration, and so on and so forth. Again, you can even limit mobile storage access. That basically refers to a thumb drive, anything you want. You may notice that there is a send destination option. Now, there are three options in here, because typically it's either locked or unlocked. But you notice here we have locked, registered, and unregistered. So locked basically means that feature's locked, you can't really do anything. But then you have registered, which means that you can only send to destinations that are already in the address book. All right, that means that you can't manually input a destination. So if we're doing scan to SMB, if we're doing scan to email or whatever it is, I'm limited to what's in the address book. All right, so this is a really nice security feature. So now the administrator can truly limit where the documents and whatnot are going to make their way to. Right, so we can limit it there. And then that third option we saw in there, unregistered, means that we can now send it to not only what's in the address book, but now we can also manually input our destinations as well, right? So we have a little bit of flexibility with how we can manage that feature. The last thing I want to look at in this particular view is the unauthorized job. Now you'll notice here we have convert to match and cancel. Now what this means is, if I have this on convert to match, and that's what it's defaulted to, let's say I have my print driver set up to color, for a color print job. But my user privileges do not allow me to do color prints. I can only do monochrome, right? Based on the CFO's doctrine of trying to save color prints, which of course we want everybody printing color. But nevertheless, we may have some people that want to limit that. So what this does is, if I send a color print job to the machine, but I only have monochrome rights, it'll actually take that color job and automatically convert it to a monochrome job. Right? And then the other option in this particular menu is to cancel the job. Right? So if I send a color job to the machine takes the job and just the job just dies. It stops and it doesn't print anything. Typically, you're going to have it convert. But again, important to remember this, especially if, let's say, you're a service tech out there. Customers going to say, I'm sending color print jobs, but all I get is monochrome. All right. Well, on the surface, that could be, a video board issue or something like that. However, now we can take a look. Do you have job accounting turned on? Is access control on? Oh, wait a minute. We have a settings issue to take a look at. Right. So again, that's why as a tech, this can definitely come in helpful as well. So again, just for the purposes of demonstration here, I'm going to give myself administrative rights, monochrome printing, copying is unlocked, and again, I have scan to email locked just for fun. And again, I just called it test, and away I go. Now we can see that authority right in here. Again, notice it's user created. So user created basically means I can delete it if I want to. These are the roles or the authorities that come in the machine as part of the standard settings. To be honest with you, I highly recommend making your own authorities. The main reason being, it's not that I don't trust the authorities that we have in there. It's just that too often you'll be expecting a certain feature to be open or something like that, and it may not be part of the standalone authority or the default authorities that we have in there. So honestly, it just takes a minute. Your best bet is just to go ahead and create your own, and it'll make your life a lot easier, I assure you. So now that we have our authority done, right, test. Next step of this process, again, we saw that we had to do the authority, then we have to do a group. Now, the reason we need to create a group kind of bridges the gap between our actual user and the authority, that set of privileges. The reason for this is really for management purposes. So let's say you have a system administrator that has human resources and accounting, the accounting department, right? They have to have the same access privileges, but as an administrator, I want to know that these people are in human resources and these people are in accounting, even though they're going to come back to the same authority. All right. So that's really the goal behind having the group, the different groups. Now, you don't have to do different groups. You can just have one authority, one group, and then 100 users if you wanted to. So it really just depends on how you want to mix and match the settings. All right. But again, that question comes up somewhat often as far as why we have that little group in the middle. Why can't I just go authority right to the user? And that's why. It's actually a pretty nice little benefit, especially if you have some enterprise customers and larger customers that do have some larger sub-departments that they may want to manage and keep track of. And this can kind of help you do it and keep a little more organized. So I'm just going to add my group. Again, notice I only have 2 fields in here. So I'm just going to call this test. And you see I'm going to point it to my test authority. This step right here is very commonly overlooked. Very often I'll see somebody create the group. They'll remember to create the group, but they'll forget to associate it with that authority we created a moment ago. Right? Then they go to log in and then they wonder why certain features aren't working the way they want it to. Right? So let's also ensure that when we go through, we are being very specific about what we're choosing and as we go through the various settings of authority, group, and the user. So I have my group created. I'm going to apply that, of course. Hit OK. And there's my group. And again, you see the group name and the authority, right? So you can confirm. Now the final step is to create a user. So we go to that individual. And now you're going to see the user profile. Of course, we have one user profile in here so far. That is just our administrator. So we're just going to go ahead and add another one. We have the user ID, so I'll just call that GG. Now, again, remember, the user ID is going to be different than our user name. The user ID is what's actually being typed in at the operations panel of the machine. The user name, on the other hand, would be Gabe Gagliardo, right? So that's going to be for management purposes, whereas the GG is going to be for logging in. So I'm just going to call this GG123. Username will just be Gabe. Password is required. I'll just call that 1111, 1111. Notice we also have email address, fax number, the group, all right? So it is important to ensure we go to that test group or that group that you created. And notice here we also have this other little wrinkle of adding this user information to the address book, right? So let's say I have email addresses and fax numbers, and I want this stored. I can not only use it from creating a user, but I can also input it into our address book. So now that I have everything in place, I'm just going to hit apply. And there's my user. So now if I look at the operations panel, and let's get a view of that LCD. Notice now how I'm at the home screen, right? I can navigate, I can go through a couple of things. But now, because this is application authentication, but now when I go to copy, there's my password prompt. And I don't know if it comes up on your screens. It might be a little bit small, depending on how you're viewing this. But if you look at the domain list, it says local. Right? So again, that suggests that we have our local job, authentication. So I'm just going to input my user ID, or my login. So that was GG123. I'm just going to use the keypad for that. And then my password is 1111. Done, and okay. And we're in. Now you notice, look at my color mode, right? If you remember, when I created my authority, I limited myself to monochrome only. So when I choose that, notice if I go to full color, I can't do it. All right. So now I can only do my monochrome jobs. If I go back and look at my scan to email, remember how we locked scan to email? But we made it wide open. And notice how I can go right in without any issue. And you see we have, again, notice how I went into scan to server. That's because I locked scan to server. And you see how it says access is denied. So I'm using this and it's working just fine, right? I have my monochrome copying only. I can get into scan to email without issue. However, if I want to do anything else, access is denied. Excuse me. So that means it's working properly. And we have it all configured. So that's your access control. It's actually not too bad. At least I don't think it's too bad. So you're just going to basically choose your authentication method, basic device application. You're going to decide what's wide open, what's not wide open, right? So in this case, we chose scan to email to be wide open. Create your authority. Choose your login options, right? When you're going to log out, all those things. Create your group. Create your user. And then log in. Simple. Now, the next piece of this puzzle is if we want to do job accounting. All right. Again, I talked about user management and things like that. We'll talk about that a little bit more detail later on. So I'm going to get through our job accounting piece of this now, and then we will, and then we'll take a look at that exporting option and everything else that we talked about. So I'm just going to go back to my authentication method and start from scratch. Set it back to basic. Make sure that that's there. We're in there. Everything's good. And now, if we just go back to our screen, we'll see that our authentication is back to normal, and I can use the machine as usual, right? Again, just to kind of prove the point, I'm just going to log out. And you see now we can use the machine as we wish. All right. So our job account, our access control and everything else is off. Now, next thing we're going to do is we'll look at that job accounting. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to choose either device or application authentication. So for job accounting, that same principle applies. Even though we have two separate lists that we're going to manage, we still have to choose when we're prompted for that login. So I'm just going to go ahead and choose device app authentication this time, just to kind of mix it up. Next, I can just go down here and I can say standard accounting only. So when I do that and I hit apply, now job accounting is turned on. So if we look at the operations panel of the machine, you're going to see my password prompt, because this is device authentication, this means now that I can't do anything. Notice I can't go to my home screen, I can't back out, I can look at my toner levels, but I can't navigate to any icons. Also, if you look in my domain, it says standard accounting. Might be kind of tough on this view, but it says standard accounting. Now, another point on this is if I need to log in and do an administrative function, change the IP address, something like that, and I try to log in with my ID and password here, I'm not going to be able to log in as of right now with my administrator credentials. The reason for this is because I'm on the standard accounting domain, which means that my administrator is currently under the local domain. So if I choose my list, I can actually switch to my local domain. So if we have job accounting turned on and you need to change some administrative settings, and job accounting is active, we do need to ensure that if I am to log in as an administrator, I choose local. And then I can log in. Because again, under the standard accounting domain, I cannot log in as an admin. So this kind of goes back to what I was discussing earlier, where if you have access control, that's one list, and if you have standard accounting, that's another list. And again, the good news, as we just saw, is that we can now toggle between the two, right? So we're not locked into that standard accounting. I can't switch over if I do have to do some administrative functions. So now looking back here at the computer, standard accounting is turned on. Now it's just a matter of going to my standard accounting list. And again, to just kind of reiterate from what we saw before, there's nothing in my standard accounting list. There's no administrator, there's nothing. So no matter what I try to log in, when standard accounting list is chosen, or standard accounting is the domain, I'm not going to be able to log in because I don't have any credentials for that particular list, right? Again, two lists to manage, one for access control, one for job accounting. So let's just go ahead and create an accounting user. I'll just call it GG123. Give it a password, 1111, 1111. Give myself some features. Let's say I'll give myself 2 color copies, 2 mono copies, and that's all we'll do for now. So there it is. There's my, my accounting ID. Simple. The next piece is going into our accounting methods. Now you'll notice here that the accounting mode is already on standard accounting. This is because earlier, when we went into that AA method, we already chose standard accounting as the option. So just by clicking that up there, it automatically enables it in this particular menu view. All right? So continuing on, we have this enabled. Notice if I have reset usage, right, I can go daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, and so forth. So this is talking about when the counter for that particular user is going to be reset. Is there going to be 100 color copies every day, every week, every month, whatever you might decide. But now choosing this is not going to be enough. We also need to start that counter. Right? So now if you look just below, when I hit that drop down, there's a manual reset. Now notice how I'm not applying this, right? I'm not going up and applying. I'm just going to hit reset usage now. Now at this point, I have a counter that is being tracked. So now whenever I log in with that GG123 login, it is now tracking everything. So when I go to export a report, I have data. And that's indicated by down here, where you see if on the screen here, it says export history data. So right now, if I were to hit export, see how I get some information. Now, if I don't automatically reset that, let's say I clear the report out. If I don't manually reset that counter, right, by doing that, if I don't do that and I hit export, it says file does not exist. So that means now if I don't do that manual reset, I'm not tracking anything. I'm not going to have any data until I have a reset point. Now, in the case of daily usage, daily reset, it's not really a big deal because that's going to reset every night at midnight. So if I were to set it to daily right now, at midnight tonight, it would have some data. The problem comes when we're talking about weekly or quarterly reset or monthly reset. So let's say I do it weekly. That means that you're not going to have a reset point until, Sunday night at, Sunday morning at midnight, at 12 a.m. That can be a problem. You can lose a week's worth of data. So that's why, again, we want to ensure that once we have our users configured and we have everything else set up, we do that manual reset to ensure that we're starting to track some data. So now that I have my reset done, right? Again, I'm just going to do a manual reset. I have my user list chosen, right? There's my user and my credentials and my rights. Again, I can go to details and look at what I have access to, right? So color copy, mono copy. Again, you see here usage, that's just showing what I've actually done so far. And let me get something to make a copy of. So I'll just make a copy of the back of my badge. So let's walk up to the machine. I'm going to log in. And I'm in. So I'll just put this here. And I was limited to 2 color copies. So I'm just going to set this to 6 color copies. And I am going to full color. I'm going to hit start. So now what's going to happen here is it's going to print out. Do you want to? Here we go. It's going to print out my 3 pages. And of course, if we don't have paper, that can be an issue. So I'll just set that there. And as it processes, and again, it's not going to be printing our 3rd option because we don't have those rights for that multiple jobs. There we go. So we go in there, and now I can go back to my copy. I can do my monochrome. Let's say I do 6. 16 doesn't matter because my limit is 2, right? It's only going to do 2 copies. Let's not worry about that. That's just a trace setting issue. Notice how it's set account limited, right? So that account limited is what's going to tell us that we can't make those copies, right? So again, I chose 16. My limit is 2. It's going to kick out my 2 copies in monochrome. And then it's not going to do anything else. So that means now that we have our limitation, and what we can do now is we can take a look at what that report is going to return for us now. So now that we have some information in there, I can go in to my accounting methods, and let's just take a look at that export on the big screen here. So I went and hit an export, and actually before I do this, let me do a reset point to ensure that we have kind of a bookend for my data. I'll hit export. And I'll just open that. Let me zoom out to a regular view. And let's just take a look at this Excel file here up on the caster there. And now we can see GG123, and that's all my usage. Right? and you just have to associate this number with the particular feature. This is something that I'm hoping we get changed, but this is how it's going to display for now. I would imagine that this gets rectified with future firmware, but for now, you're going to see the user account ID, and then everything is going to be in line, like that. All right. So again, this is feedback that we've kind of put up to the factory. We're hoping to kind of get that set into columns rather than all in one field. Right. So that's how you would export your data. Now, we've seen our access control. We've seen our job accounting. Now, how do we put these two things together? Well, it's actually very simple. So let's say I go into my individual. And when we go in here, excuse me, when we create our users, notice how there's an accounting ID option way at the bottom. Let me zoom in a little bit for you. There we go. So way at the bottom here is our accounting methods. All right? So I can actually go in here and I can choose my accounting ID. And just by choosing that, I've now associated this GG123 for job accounting with the user ID up here. So that's how you put the two worlds together. So now they're associated with each other. I've simply linked this list to this list. So now if we do want to have job accounting and access control on at the same time, that's how you would do it. Right? Simply take the accounting ID and map it to an access control ID. That's all there is to it. Well, that's all fine and good if we have 5 or 6 IDs to deal with. But if we have 100, 200, whatever? Well, this is going to look at now the export option that we have. So if we look up here in the upper right-hand corner, we have task and export. So I can export, and actually you see here, no encryption without confidential, and encryption. So no encryption refers to just exporting raw text and data. No encryption without confidential will export all the data without passwords. And then encryption is something that is just for archiving. So I can't do anything with this. This actually password protects the file. So the only thing I can do is export it from the machine and upload it to another. That's it. So it's strictly for archiving. Whereas the first two options are going to be more for not only archiving, but also for editing and user management. So for our purposes, I'm just going to go no encryption. I'm going to choose the no encryption option. Now you'll notice in here, and let me zoom out. You'll notice in here now I have all of my user lists. See login ID, password, so on and so forth. Now just imagine being able to just copy and paste into this spreadsheet from anything, or just managing it however you want. You know, you can just kind of go down the line and see how it automatically increments. I mean, it just depends on how you want to set it up. And then all you would have to do is just save the file and then upload it. And you would upload it, just for the purposes here, I'm not going to save it. So if we were to go in here again and we see task, import, we would simply take that file we just saved and import it into the machine. That's it. Simple. Now, in the case of job accounting, it's the exact same procedure. So if I go over to my accounting methods, or my accounting list, again, standard accounting list, and then I go to export, I have the same type of thing that I can do. Again, no encryption without confidential, and encryption. So same idea there. And then I can open my list. So now let's just say I have a series of accounting IDs. I can now export my accounting list and my user access control list, and all I have to do is just copy and paste. and just paste it right into the other Excel spreadsheet. Save them both, upload them to their respective locations, and now we're able to easily manage users, up to 500 users, for either accounting or access control. Right? So we have that easy management there. Right? The last piece that we're going to look at is the print driver. Right? So we talked about how the print driver has that automatic pop-up capability. Right? So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the printers folder. So I'll just get this open up here. And let me zoom in. So I'm just going to go into my Polaris driver. And I'm going to go to my printing preferences. All right, important to make sure we go to printing preferences. And we'll just give this a moment to load. And then we have our advanced. Now you notice how you have your print mode at the top. I'm sorry, where is it? Job accounting. So we go down to our job accounting. I knew I was off somewhere. Now when I hit job accounting, now we can go accounting type, or we can go ID only. So again, going back to that law firm example, if they just want to have an ID code rather than an ID and a password, this is where you would configure that. Now, the next piece of this is whether it's accounting or ID only. We talked about that pop-up. So now I can put something in here, and I can go confirm password when printing. In fact, let me zoom in a little bit more so you can get a better view of that. Confirm name and password when printing. So what this means now is that whenever I go to print, it's automatically going to give me a prompt to put in a password. All right, so if we're talking about a college computer lab where we might have some students that have to type in a user code and we need to bill them back for those prints, again, the law office, financial institution, whatever it might be, now we can have that pop-up option. So just to show you how that works, I'm going to go ahead and save this as ID only. You have to put in a default ID. You can't just leave it blank. There has to be something there. So I'll hit OK. And let me just go ahead and try to print. So just for the example here, I'll try and print this web service page. Give it a second to load. My computer's running a little bit slow right now. There we go. So I'll choose my Polaris driver here. And here's our pop-up. So again, I apologize about that little mix-up. So now I can type in client X, again, the social security number, whatever it might be. And if we type in the wrong ID, it'll just die at the machine, right? It won't actually print the job. So in this case, the ID that I just typed in doesn't exist. So it's going to hit the machine, and it's not going to print anything. So that's our job accounting and access control. That's the driver. That's setting it up, user management, and those kinds of things. So at this point, let's go to a little Q&A. And what we'll do is we'll open it up. So we'll, in the chat box that you have to the right of your, in your screen there, you do have some capabilities here to type in a question. So please go ahead and type in some questions. We'll take a minute to review these questions that you might have. So we'll spare you guys, give you guys just a minute or two. Okay, so first question I have is the hard drive required for job accounting on the 8123 and the 8128? It's a good question. It actually came from Jeff. Hi, Jeff. How you doing? The hard drive is not required for job accounting on the monochrome machines, all right, on the SCX 8123 and 8128. It will work without the hard drive, all right? Just understand that you kind of have some, other limitations as far as not having the drive, but it will use the flash of the machine to do it. I have a question here from Alan. Hi, Alan. How you doing? Was the PIN code only login feature found on the Cosmos models removed? And the answer is yes. So what Alan is referring to is in Cosmos, we actually had 3 login method types, right? We had ID and password, login ID only, and then we had PIN code, which was kind of like an encrypted user ID and password all meshed into one. So if somebody's looking over your shoulder, they can't really see what you're typing. And it's just kind of just the one PIN. So Alan, on this case, we do not have the PIN code option. Now, that doesn't mean it will never exist. It just means that it's not there as of today. So if we have extensive feedback from the field, we could submit it as feedback to the engineers and see if we can, push to have it added to the firmware. But as it is today, the PIN code option, as with Cosmos, is not going to be available on Polaris. All right. It's a good question. Let's see, what else do we have? Any other questions before we move on? Again, we'll give you guys just another minute or so. Sometimes there's a little bit of lag as far as what I see here in the chat box compared to as far as what's actually sent. All right, well, we have another question that's not exactly job accounting related, but it's easy enough. So we have a question here from Rocco. Hello, Rocco. Thanks for joining. It says, can these copiers send monthly meter reads to our company? The answer is yes. That is done within the web service. It is using the email notification feature. It's in the regular job settings. Now, again, I don't want to focus too much time on that, just because, again, I want to keep this really focused on the job accounting option of things. However, the answer is yes. Now, if you've had somebody attend one of our training classes, we've gone through that. In fact, let me see if I can show you very quickly. All right, if we can just hop over to the computer view for a second. Thanks. So if we want to do that, that's under our machine settings. And that's all the way down here under email notification. So when we enable this, we can actually choose, once we put in our email, scroll down and we can go to information. And you see in here, one of them is the accounting report, meter. In fact, let me zoom in a little bit. And you can email any one of these reports on any one of these intervals, right? So you can do it every certain number of pages, every day, every week, every month. So yes, Rocco, you can do it, and it's something that's fairly easy to configure. All right. Next question we have is another one from Alan. Let's see what we got here. Was the ability to limit access to only color, leaving black and white copy features uncoded, removed? And again, I wouldn't quite say it's removed. It's just not on this initial launch of firmware. So what Alan is asking is, earlier on when we did the access control piece and we limited to, let's say, as a user, I was limited to monochrome copying. But what Alan is saying is, can we make monochrome copying wide open to anybody and everybody, but make color copying require a password, which is currently a feature on Cosmos. It is not a feature on Polaris, as it is right now. Now, you have to keep in mind that when Cosmos first came out, it wasn't a feature either when it first launched. It was something that was added to firmware later on down the road, a few months, almost half a year after it actually launched. So that is something that, again, as feedback, we can present that to the engineers, and we can see about getting that implemented in another revision. All right. But again, this all comes as feedback. This is information that you got to pass up through, through your RSMs and through your technology, through your solutions people. Let them know if there are features. I can't promise that it will be implemented. It will require a certain number of people to actually require the feature. Something like this, I wouldn't be surprised if we added it in a future revision. However, I can't promise that as of today, simply because I can't speak for the engineers as of right now. But what I can say is that historically speaking, it's something that we may see in a future revision. But again, that remains to be seen at this point. Let's see what else we have. Any other questions out there? All right, give you guys another few seconds. All right. Set up meter. Okay. All right. Yeah, Rocco is just... Actually, Rocco, it's no disruption. Rocco was just asking if there was a test button after the setup on those meter reads. There is no test button. It just requires your machine to be set up for scan to email. Okay. So, Rocco, if you... oh, actually, yeah, you're going to have somebody in class next month. It's actually a fairly easy procedure. You just need to make sure that the email settings are set up properly in your network settings. And, you know, you can test that once the machine is set up for emails. So as long as the machine is set up for email, which is configured much like on Cosmos, you can go ahead and do this. But there is no test button to test that the email goes. All right, another question here. Let's see here. After programming how many copies you want to make, does the machine count down to let you know how many copies it made? And if it jams, will you let you know where it left off? Okay. Well, it does track how many copies you've made as far as the thing. Yeah, it actually displays that on the screen. Again, I got to ask you guys, can we please relegate the questions to job accounting and access control? Again, we're running short on time, so I just want to ensure that we are focusing on the access control related questions. But again, Rocco was asking if the machine will count down the copies that were made so far within a job, and the answer is yes, but it kind of counts up. All right. Do we have any other access control and job accounting related questions? All right. So at this point, we will break. This training has been recorded, right? So you can actually review this in any time. You can watch the recording of it. Probably, I would say sometime next week, you'll have access to it. So you'll be able to log in and review it as a refresher and watch it anytime. And just use your credentials that you used to log in today. And you can view it, as well as some other trainings that you may have noticed we have posted there. All right. So with that, I appreciate you all taking some time to join me today. Again, thank you all for some great questions, and look forward to working with you in the next session. Have a great afternoon.